Okay, so we're in 3.4 doing trig derivatives, which is of course bound to be a load of fun because you love trig and you love derivatives. I mean, you put them together, how much better could it possibly get? As lessons go, this one is not bad at all. The main issue of this lesson will be if you have any weaknesses on previous lessons. The part that makes this a lesson that stands alone is you have to memorize 6 trig derivatives. Okay? There's just no way around that. So we want to write these down and start pounding these into your brain. The derivative of sine is cosine. The derivative of cosine is negative sine. You'll notice maybe as you can peek ahead, half of these answers turn up negative, and I'll show you a little pattern as to how. Tan, you need to memorize, is secant squared. Cotan is going to be negative cosecant squared. Secant is going to create itself as well as tangent, secant and tangent. Cosecant is going to be negative cosecant and cotangent. So there's 6 rules to memorize. Really, there's like 3.5. The ones that don't start with co, you need to memorize those 3 the best. If you memorize those 3, then the other little half of this is, if you do the same thing but with cos, it's just the negative version. So sine got you cosine. It's the same thing. Cosine became sine. Just do a negative on any answer that has its roots in the cos. Tan's answer and cotan's answer, the only difference is the word co on the answer, and the co answers go negative. And secant, cosecant, the prefix co is the only difference here, cosecant and cotangent. But anything that has that co prefix in the problem is going to have a negative in the answer. Unless, of course, it already started negative. If it started negative, then it would turn into positive. Signs of change on the codes. That's just memory. I don't have a real reason as to why. It has to do something probably with x plus h's. In that first derivative, the long way lesson we did, and somebody figured out a pattern and said, hey, stop doing the x plus h thing, just memorize these 6, and everybody said, all right, sounds good to me. So we've got to know those. The problems aren't going to be that basic because there'd only be 6 homework problems. Okay, they're going to build stuff around them. So if I asked you to do the derivative of 3x plus cotan x, we're back to like the second day's lesson where we learn if this is adding that and we need to do the derivatives, just do this piece and then add on the other piece. So like derivative of 3x we've been doing for about a week. Derivative of 3x has always been 3. And instead of having an add cotan x, we rely on our memory or our cheat sheet or wherever we grab it from. Cotan's derivative becomes negative cosecant squared. This one, you have 2 ways that you can approach this. Does anybody have a suggestion of how you could approach that one?
Bring sine x up with 2.
We could. Okay, so you have a second way we could tackle the derivative of that. That's newer. Quotient rule. Okay, so if you have a fraction looking thing, you could do the quotient rule. And down here, you're going to get stuck doing the quotient rule. Okay, there's no way to sidestep this one. But up here, you can either do some trig first or some calculus first. And I would suggest doing available trig when you can. Instead of having 2 dividing sine, you could have 2 multiplying cosecant. That's an easier derivative to do. The derivative of this, you don't need to do the product rule, because the thing we learned a couple days ago, if there's a number multiplying in front, just leave the number alone and do the derivative of the thing that it's multiplying. And the derivative of cosecant, we just learned today, is
Cosecant times cotan.
correct. If you did the quotient rule, you could eventually turn this out, but it would take more trig lifting later, because you'd have more, like you do bottom times the derivative of top, minus top times derivative of bottom, you square the bottom. That would be a bigger thing. You could probably separate it into fractions and do all kind of stuff with it, but it would take more work. This is different than this. Okay? When a number is multiplying in the front, you can just leave it alone. But when algebra stuff is multiplying algebra stuff, what's the only way to do that derivative? And if you're weak on the product rule, that shows up in this lesson. But if you're good at the product rule, we just do the product rule. So how's the product rule go?
X squared.
Copy the x squared
Derivative of sine.
times the derivative of sine, which is cosine.
And sine.
Okay,
Plus sine.
plus, then we'll copy the sine, times,
Derivative of x squared.
which is 2x. And it's traditional to do the algebra stuff in front of the trig stuff. It's not wrong if you did it on the other side, but you'd have to punctuate that in some way. It's easier to just slide that to the front. Question about that. This, there's no way around doing the quotient rule. We had already said that. So when we go to do the quotient rule, we have to first copy the bottom times, which is so let me go -5 sine x, okay? We can in a second, but we're only we're like a third of the way through the product rule, or quotient rule, minus for quotient rule. Then we copy
Derivative of the bottom. Or the top.
the top gets copied, times
Derivative of the bottom.
derivative of the bottom, which is,
27x squared.
and then I like to resolve the top, but eventually, when we get to a point where we have ourselves an answer, the bottom needs to get squared. So I'll usually create my answer space and commit to the bottom squared so I don't forget it. And then I'll set to work on the top. So G already said distribute, so -45 x cubed sine x minus a 40 sine x minus a 135 x squared cosine x. And then the question is any of that like terms?
Yes. The first two.
Not really, because the x cubed on the one and then the other didn't really have that x cubed stuff. So I'm going to say no, and I committed to my box a little bit too early, and I'm just going to like this. A little mushroom cloud action going on us. But that would all be the top, the bottom gets squared like this one. Possibly, might you end up on some questions separating fractions and doing stuff like that? Sure. I mean, some of those tricks, nothing from the word problem section. 3.3 is coming back in this, so 3.3 is still making you mad. This has nothing to do with any of that. But if 3.2 was still giving you trouble on like stuff, that could come back and haunt you. Maybe there's questions that you need to do some distributing or foiling or separating fractions and whatnot. But there is going to be a little bit of quotient rule, a little bit of product rule, I have to believe, but that's not really new. That just brings that back again to us. The key thing is memorizing these 6, but like I said, if you have weaknesses from 3.2, that's going to appear from time to time until we can strengthen those weaknesses. Homework from this, we're up to 147. 147, no, lie, 157. 157 goes 1 to 30. Tomorrow would just be a homework answer kind of day, so that's Thursday on the calendar we are on this year. If people are watching this video some other year, I don't know what day of the week it'll be for you. But tomorrow we go over the 157, 1 to 30. I gave you the sheet. The sheet would be due 2 days from now, which on our present calendar we put that to Friday. If one sheet is enough for you to feel great, then we could take a quiz 3 days from now. If you want a second sheet, we can do a second sheet, do a couple sheets, do whatever. But we're at a review sort of gap. So homework tomorrow, sheet the next day, and then we'll have choices to make about sheets. And we can cut off the video. If